So many Black Americans persevered through systemic racism and oppression to succeed, only to become historical footnotes. Take the legacy of LAPD's first Black officer, Robert Stewart. It might have stayed buried here in Evergreen Cemetery if not for one man's obsession bringing him back to life.
Anyway, she was the responder. She was the one.
In his day, Robert Stewart was a pioneer who changed history. But 90 years after his death, you won't find his name in a single textbook. And history buff Mike Davison might be the only one visiting his grave.
I don't know that anybody really knows who he is.
Davison is a sort of history detective in his spare time. He was researching LA's forgotten city halls when he stumbled on LAPD's first Black policeman. Born a Kentucky slave, emancipated by war, disgraced by a false accusation, Robert Stewart's story has a way of haunting you. And for the past 5 years, it's consumed Davison.
He succeeded because he was a talented man. He was a smart, talented guy.
Back in 1889, Black Republicans had become a political force in Los Angeles, pressuring then Chief James Burns to diversify the ranks with 2 Black officers who were assigned to cleaning the station, then directing traffic.
And I think he set him up to try to fail. So, okay, you don't want to be a janitor? Fine. Go stand in one of the 3 busiest intersections in LA and direct traffic.
Stewart, a member of LAPD's tug-of-war team, patrolled for 11 years, and newspapers covered him like a celebrity and a spectacle, a 6'1" Black man in blue, noting an incident where Stewart single-handedly stopped a runaway mule team.
Everyone was scattering. They were yelling, "Whoa," but then scattering out of the way. Stewart stood in the street, and when the first mule came by, he grabbed the harness and just stood there and dragged it to a stop. But the story talked about his digging in his Ethiopian heels and just horribly disgusting racist remarks, even if he did something good.
Stewart wouldn't be the last to face backlash on the job. Rita Necht was LAPD's first female homicide detective.
We knew we would get a whole rash of trash from men.
Now she's another hobby historian bringing Stewart back to life.
It's no easy task to research slaves.
She traced his birth back to this estate in Kentucky. At the time, there were no birth certificates for slaves. But using census data, pension records, and marriage licenses, she can track Stewart through time.
He apparently, from all of the readings, was a fairly soft-spoken person.
They don't know why he came to Los Angeles, eventually patrolling 6th and Broadway.
Right, so they were on the other side of the street.
Stewart's legacy as a patrolman ended here in May of 1900, when he met a 15-year-old white girl out past curfew. Her name was Grace Cunningham, and she later accused Officer Stewart of rape.
She made different claims. Her story changed a little bit from trial to trial.
LAPD's first Black officer very quickly found himself sitting in jail and stripped of his badge.
He couldn't make bail.
The courtroom, which was here on Temple Street, was packed, standing room only.
He swore many times, if I were to meet God my next minute, I would swear that I never touched that girl.
Then, on New Year's Eve, a jury acquitted Stewart. He started the first day of 1901 a free man without a job.
And that was it. There was no, and now he gets his job back, and now this happens. It just, okay, it's over.
Stewart went back to work as a janitor. The LA Times simply printed his death notice in 1931, but it was front page news in LA's Black newspaper, The Eagle. And right now, that's where his legacy ends. The LAPD has never formally apologized, and his only son is buried in an unmarked grave. He has no living descendants.
He's a pioneer. He was a trailblazer.
Davison hopes one day Stewart will be famous. Because while history tells us who we were back then, how we remember it reveals who we are today. The LAPD hired a second black officer along with Robert Stewart. His name was Joseph Henry Green. There's no photos of him, and he lasted only about a year before he was laid off. This is his tombstone here at Evergreen Cemetery. He also doesn't have any living descendants to promote his legacy or fix his grave.